Dinner with Sam was silent, and Rolf appeared at 8 to bring them both to the holding facility. Sam didn't even ask where they were going. He just played along, as if he'd known the whole time. The holding facility was an enormous wooden warehouse, and even from down the block, something about this place made Cellenia's instincts scream at her to get away. The sharp reek of unwashed bodies didn't hit her until she stepped inside. Blinking against the brightness of the torches and the crude chandeliers, it took her a few heartbeats to sort out what she was seeing. Rolf, striding ahead of them, didn't falter as he passed the cells, cell after cell, packed with slaves. Instead, he walked towards a large open space in the rear of the warehouse, where a nut-brown Elway man stood before a cluster of 4 pirates. Beside her, Sam let out a breath, his face wan. If the smell wasn't bad enough, the people in the cells clinging to the bars or cowering against the walls or clutching their children. Children. Ripped at every shred of her being. Aside from the occasional muffled weeping, the slaves were silent. Some of their eyes widened at the sight of her. She'd forgotten how she must appear, faceless, cloak waving behind her, striding past them like death itself. Some of the slaves even sketched invisible marks in the air, warding off whatever evil they thought she was. She took in the locks on the pens, counting the number of people crammed into each cell. They hailed from all the kingdoms on the continent. There were even some orange-haired, grey-eyed mountain clansmen. Wild-looking men who tracked her every movements. And women. Some of them barely older than Cellenia herself. Had they been fighters too? Or just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Cellenia's heart pounded faster. Even after all these years, people still defied Ardalan's conquest. But what right did Ardalan, or Rolf, or anyone have to treat them like this? Conquest wasn't enough. No, Ardalan had to break them. Elway, she'd heard, had taken the brunt of it. Though their king had yielded his power to the king of Ardalan, Elway soldiers still could be found fighting in the rebel groups that plagued Ardalan's forces. But the land itself was too vital for Ardalan to abandon. Elway boasted 2 of the most prosperous cities on the continent. Its territory, rich in farmland, waterways and forests, was a crucial vein in trade routes. Now, it seemed, Ardalan had decided that it might make money off its people too. The men standing around the Elway prisoner parted as Rolf approached, bowing their heads. She recognized 2 of the men from dinner the previous night. The short, bold Captain Fairview, and the one-eyed, hulking Captain Blackgold. Cellenia and Sam stopped beside Rolf. The Elway man had been stripped naked, his wiry body already bruised and bleeding. "This one fought back a bit," said Captain Fairview. Though sweat gleamed on the slave's skin, he kept his chin high, his eyes upon some distant sight. He must have been around 20? Did he have a family? "Keep him in irons, though, and he'll fetch a good price," Fairview went on, wiping his face on the shoulder of his crimson tunic. The gold embroidery was, was fraying, and the fabric, which had probably once been rich with colour, was faded and stained. "I'd send him to the market in Belhaven. Lots of rich men there needing strong hands to do their building, or women needing strong hands for something else entirely." He winked in Cellenia's direction. Unyielding rage boiled up so fast the breath was knocked from her. She didn't realize her hands were moving towards her sword until Sam knotted his fingers through hers. It was a casual enough gesture. To anyone else, it might have looked affectionate. But he squeezed her fingers tightly enough for her to know that he was well aware of what she was about to do. "How many of these slaves will actually be deemed useful?" Sam asked, releasing her gloved hand. "Ours are going to Rifthold, but you're dividing this batch up. You think your master is the first to strike a deal with me?" Rolf said. "We have other agreements in different cities. My partners in Belhaven tell me what the wealthy are looking for. I supply 'em. If I can't think of a good place to sell the slaves, I send them to Celaena. If your master has leftovers, sending them to Endovia might be a good option. Ardlan's stringy with what they'll offer when buying slaves for the salt mines. But it's better than making no money at all." So, Orlan wasn't just snatching prisoners from battlefields and their homes. They were buying slaves for the salt mines of Endovia too. "And the children?" she asked, keeping her voice as natural as possible. "Where do they go?" Rolf's eyes darkened a bit at that, glimmering with enough guilt that Cellenia wondered if the slave trade had been a last resort for him too. "We try to keep the children with their mothers," he said quietly. "But at the auction block, we can't control whether they're separated." She fought the retort on her tongue and just said, "I see. Are they a burden to sell? And how many children are we expecting in our shipment?" "We have about 10 here," Rolf said. "Your shipment shouldn't contain more than that. And they're not a burden to sell, if you know where to sell 'em." "Where?" Sam demanded. "Some wealthy household might want 'em for scullery maids or stable boys." Though his voice remained steady, Rolf studied the ground. "A brothel madam might show up at auction too, you never know." Sam's face went white with fury. If there was one thing that set him off, one subject she knew she could always rely upon to rile him up, it was this. His mother, sold at 8 to a brothel, had spent her too short 28 years clawing her way up from an orphan to one of the most successful courtesans in Rifthold. She'd had Sam only 6 years before she died, murdered by a jealous client. And though she'd amassed some money, it hadn't been enough to liberate her from her brothel, or to provide for Sam. But she'd been a favourite of Arobyn's, and when he'd learned that she wanted Sam to be trained by him, he'd taken the boy in. "We'll take that into consideration," Sam said sharply. It wasn't enough for Cellenia to ensure the deal fell apart. No, that wasn't nearly enough. Not when all these people were imprisoned here. Her blood pounded in her veins. Death, at least, was quick, especially when dealt by her hand. But slavery was unending suffering. "Very well," she said, lifting her chin. She had to get out of here, and get Sam out of here before he snapped. A deadly gleam was glowing in his eyes. "I look forward to seeing our shipment tomorrow night." She inclined her head towards the pens behind her. "When will these slaves be sent out?" It was a dangerous, stupid question. Rolf looked at Captain Fairview, who rubbed his dirty head. "This lot? We'll divvy them up, then load them onto a new ship tomorrow, probably. They'll sail around the same time you do, I bet. We'll need to assemble crews." He and Rolf started off on a conversation about manning the ships, and Cellenia took that as her cue to leave. With a final look at the slaves standing there, Cellenia strode out of the warehouse that stank of fear and death. "Cellenia, wait!" Sam called, panting as he walked after her. She couldn't wait. She just started walking, and walking, and walking, and now, as she reached the empty beach, far, far from the lights of Skulls Bay, she wouldn't stop walking until she reached the water. Not too far down the curve in the bay, a watchtower stood guard, shipbreaker hanging across the water for the duration of the night. The moon illuminated the powder-fine sand and turned the calm sea into a silver mirror. She removed her mask and dropped it behind her, and ripped off her cloak, boots, and tunic. The damp breeze kissed her bare skin, fluttering her delicate white undershirt. Bath-warm waves flooded past her, and she kicked up a spray of water as she kept walking. Before she could get deeper than her calves, Sam grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She yanked on her arm, but he held firm. In a single, swift movement, she twirled, swinging her other arm. But he knew the move, because he'd practiced it right alongside her for years. And he caught her other hand. "Stop!" he said, but she swept her foot. She caught him behind the knee, sending him tumbling down. Sam didn't release her, and the water and sand sprayed as they hit the ground. Cellenia landed on top of him, but Sam didn't pause for a moment. Before she could give him a sharp elbow to the face, he flipped her. The air whooshed out of her lungs. Sam lunged for her, and she had the sense to bring her foot up just as he leapt. She kicked him square in the stomach. He cursed as he dropped to his knees. The surf broke around him, a shower of silver. She sprang into a crouch, the sand hissing beneath her feet, and she made to tackle him. But Sam had been waiting, and he twisted away, catching her by the shoulder and throwing her to the ground. She knew she'd been caught before he'd even finished slamming her into the sand. He pinned her wrists, his knees digging into her thighs to keep her from getting her legs under her again. "Enough!" His fingers dug painfully into her wrists. A rogue wave reached them, soaking her. She thrashed her fingers, curling, straining to draw blood, but they couldn't reach his hands. The sand shifted enough that she could scarcely get a steady surface to support herself, to flip him. But Sam knew her. He knew her movements, knew what tricks she'd like to pull. "Stop," he said, his breath ragged. "Please." In the moonlight, his handsome face was strained. "Please," he repeated hoarsely. The sorrow, the defeat in his voice made her pause. A wisp of cloud passed over the moon, illuminating the strong panes of his cheekbones, the curve of his lips, the kind of rare beauty that had made his mother so successful. Far above his head, stars flickered faintly, nearly invisible in the glow of the moon. "I'm not letting go of you until you promise to stop attacking me," Sam said. His face was inches away, and she felt the breath of every one of his words on her mouth. She took an uneven breath, then another. She had no reason to attack Sam. Not when he'd kept her from gutting that pirate in the warehouse. Not when he'd gotten so riled up about slave children. Her legs trembled with pain. "I promise," she mumbled. "Swear it?" "I swear on my life." He watched her for a long moment, and then a second mumble, then slowly eased off her. She waited until he was standing, then got to her feet. Both of them were soaking and crusted with sand, and she was fairly certain her hair had come half out of her braid, and that she looked like a ragged lunatic. "So," he said, taking off his boots and tossing them onto the sand behind them. "Are you going to explain yourself?" He rolled his pants up to the knees and took a few steps into the surf. Cellenia began pacing, waves splattering at her feet. She began, but waved an arm, shaking her head fiercely. "You what?" His words were almost drowned out by the crashing waves. She whirled to face him. "How can you bear to look at those people and not do anything?" "The slaves." She resumed her pacing. "It makes me sick! It makes me so mad! I think I might..." She couldn't finish the thought. "Might what?" Splashing steps sounded, and she looked over her shoulder to find him approaching. He crossed his arms, bracing for a fight. "Might do something as foolish as attacking Rolf's men in their own warehouse." It was now or never. She hadn't wanted to involve him, but now that her plans had changed, she needed his help. "I might do something as foolish as freeing the slaves," she said. Sam went so still that he might have been turned to stone. "I knew you were thinking up something, but freeing them? I'm going to do it, with you or without you," she said. She'd only intended to ruin the deal, but from the moment she'd walked into that warehouse tonight, she'd known she couldn't leave the slaves. "Rolf will kill you," Sam said. "Or Arobyn will if Rolf doesn't first." "I have to try," she said. "Why?" Sam stepped close enough that she needed to tilt her head up to see his face. "We're assassins! We kill people! We destroy lives every day!" "We have a choice," she breathed. "Maybe not when we were children, when it was Arobyn or death, but now. Now you and I have a choice in the things we do. Those slaves were just taken. They were fighting for their freedom, or lived too close to a battlefield, or some mercenaries passed through their town and stole them. They're innocent people. And we weren't." Something icy pierced her heart at the glimmer of a memory. "We kill corrupt officials and adulterous spouses. We make it quick and clean. These are entire families being ripped apart. Even one of these people used to be somebody." Sam's eyes glowed. "I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't like the idea of all this. Not just the slaves, but Arobyn's involvement. And those children." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "But we're just two people, surrounded by Rolf's pirates." She gave him a crooked grin. "Then it's good that we're the best. And," she added, It's good that I've been asking him so many questions about his plans for the next 2 days. Sam blinked. You realize this is the most reckless thing you've ever done, right? Reckless, maybe. The most meaningful, too. Sam stared at her long enough for heat to flood her cheeks, as if he could see right inside of her, see everything. The fact that he didn't turn away from whatever he saw made her blood thrum in her veins. I suppose if we're going to die, it should be for a noble cause, he said. She snorted, using it as an excuse to step away from him. We're not going to die. At least, not if we follow my plan. He groaned. You already have a plan. She grinned, then told him everything. When she'd finished, he'd only scratched his head. Well, he admitted, sitting on the sand. I suppose that'd work. We'd have to time it right, but it could work. She sat beside him. When Arobyn finds out, leave Arobyn to me. I'll figure out how to deal with him. We could always just not return to Rifthold, Sam suggested. What? Run away? Sam shrugged, though he kept his eyes on the waves. She could have sworn a blush darkened his cheeks. He might very well kill us. If we run away, he'd hunt us for the rest of our lives. Even if we took different names, he'd find us. As if she could leave her entire life behind. He's invested too much money in us, and we've yet to pay him back entirely. He'd see it as a bad investment. Sam's gaze drifted northward, as if he could see the sprawling capital city, and its towering glass castle. I think there's more at work here than this trade agreement. What do you mean? Sam traced circles in the sand between them. I mean, why send the two of us here in the first place? His excuse for sending us was a lie. We're not instrumental to this deal. He could have just as easily sent 2 other assassins who aren't at each other's throats all the time. What are you implying? Sam shrugged. Perhaps Arobyn wanted us out of Rifthold right now. Needed us to get out of the city for a month. A chill went through her. Arobyn wouldn't do that. He wouldn't? Sam asked. Did we ever find out why Ben was there the night Gregory was captured? If you're implying that Arobyn somehow set Ben up to... I'm not implying anything. But some things don't add up, and there are questions that haven't been answered. We're not supposed to question Arobyn, she murmured. And since when do you ever follow orders? She stood. Let's get through the next few days. Then we'll consider whatever conspiracy theories you're inventing. Sam was on his feet in an instant. I don't have any theories. Just questions. Questions that you should be asking yourself, too. Why did he want us gone a month? We can trust Arobyn. Even as the words left her mouth, she felt stupid for saying them. Sam stooped to pick up his boots. I'm going back to the tavern. Are you coming? No. I'm staying here for a little longer. Sam gave her an appraising look, but nodded. We're to examine Arobyn's slaves on their ship, at 4 tomorrow afternoon. Try not to stay out here the whole night. We need all the rest we can get." She didn't reply, and turned away before she could watch him head towards the golden lights of Skulls Bay. She walked along the curve of the shoreline, all the way to the lone watchtower. After studying it from the shadows, the 2 catapults near its top, the giant chain anchored above them, she continued on. She walked until there was nothing in the world but the grumble and the hiss of the waves, the sigh of the sand beneath her feet, and the glare of the moon on the water. She walked until a surprisingly cold breeze swept past her. She halted. Slowly, Cellenia turned north, towards the source of the breeze, which smelled of a faraway land she hadn't seen in 8 years. Pine and snow, a city still in winter's grasp. She breathed it in, staring across the leagues of lonely black ocean, seeing, somehow, that distant city that once, long ago, had been her home. The wind rippled the strands of hair from her braid, lashing them across her face. Orlan, a city of light and music, watched over by an alabaster castle with an opal tower so bright it could be viewed for miles. The moonlight vanished behind a thick cloud. In the sudden dark, the stars glowed brighter. She knew all the constellations by heart, and she instinctively sought out the stag, lord of the north, and the immovable star that crowned his head. Back then, she hadn't had any choice. When Arobyn offered her this path, it was either that or death. But now, she took a shuddering breath. No. She was as limited in her choices as she had been when she was 8 years old. She was Ardalan's assassin, Arobyn Hamel's protégé and heir, and she would always be. It was a long walk back to the tavern.